Two kittens are inseparable, until one guy makes a terrible mistake. The morning sun, a gentle wash of gold and amber, spilled across the weathered planks of the barn. Martha, her silver hair braided neatly down her back, stepped out onto the porch, a steaming mug in her hand. The air was crisp and carried the scent of dew-kissed hay, mingled with the sweet fragrance of the honeysuckle that climbed the porch railing. It was a symphony of smells she'd woken to for over 70 years, a comforting constant in a world that seemed to change faster every day. From beneath the porch steps, two tiny ginger furballs erupted, tumbling over each other in a blur of playful energy. Rusty and Sunny, the two newest additions to the farm, were a constant source of amusement and quiet joy for Martha. They were barely 8 weeks old, their eyes still that hazy blue of kittenhood, their paws oversized for their delicate bodies. They'd been born in the hayloft, their mother a ginger stray Martha had taken in a few months before. The mother cat, a seasoned hunter, had disappeared a week ago, leaving Martha to care for the two rambunctious kittens. Martha chuckled, her weathered face crinkling into a network of fine lines, as she watched them stalk a hapless grasshopper, their little tails twitching with fierce concentration. They pounced, missing their target by a mile, and ended up in a tangled heap of paws and fur, their tiny mews a mix of frustration and delight. "You two rascals," Martha murmured, sipping her coffee. "You'll be chasing mice before you know it." The farm was her sanctuary, a sprawling expanse of rolling hills, fields of corn, and a rambling old farmhouse that had been in her family for generations. She'd lived there her entire life, raised her children there, and watched them leave to build lives of their own. Her husband, Thomas, had passed away 10 years ago, leaving a void that was only partially filled by the rhythm of farm life and the companionship of her animals. The days followed a predictable, comforting pattern. She rose with the sun, tended to her chickens, collected eggs, milked her two cows, Bessie and Daisy, and spent hours in her vegetable garden, coaxing life from the rich soil. The evenings were spent on the porch, watching the fireflies dance in the twilight, often with a book in her lap and a purring cat curled up at her feet. Rusty and Sunny were inseparable. They ate together, slept together, and explored the farm together, their tiny ginger bodies mirroring each other's movements. They chased butterflies in the meadow, stalked field mice in the barn, and napped in sunbeams on the porch, their purrs a gentle, rhythmic counterpoint to the chirping of crickets. Martha watched them with a tenderness that went beyond simple affection. They were a reminder of the enduring cycle of life, of the simple joys that could be found even in the face of loss and loneliness. She knew, with a pang of bittersweet awareness, that they wouldn't stay kittens forever. But for now, in this golden summer of their youth, they were perfect. They were a balm to her soul, a connection to the enduring spirit of the farm, a living embodiment of the peace she'd found in her quiet, solitary life. The farm was their kingdom, and she, their benevolent, loving queen. The sun, the sky, and every blade of grass was home. A week later, a plume of dust rose from the long gravel driveway, announcing the arrival of a visitor. Martha, weeding her tomato plants, straightened up, shading her eyes with a calloused hand. She recognized the familiar blue pickup truck. It was David, her nephew, the son of her youngest daughter, Sarah. David was a good lad, Martha thought, though she didn't see him as often as she'd like. He lived in Oakhaven, a small town about 30 miles away, working as a mechanic at a local garage. He was a quiet, introspective young man, with his mother's kind eyes and his father's strong jaw. He'd always been fond of the farm, spending summers there as a boy, helping his grandfather with chores and exploring the woods. The truck pulled up in front of the house, and David climbed out, a shy smile on his face. He was taller than Martha remembered, his shoulders broader, but there was still a boyishness about him that touched her heart. "Aunt Martha," he greeted, his voice warm and respectful. "How are you doing?" "David, it's good to see you," Martha replied, returning his smile. "Come on up to the porch. I've got some fresh lemonade." They settled into the rocking chairs on the porch, the two ginger kittens weaving around David's legs, sniffing at his boots. He reached down and gently stroked Rusty's head, earning a loud purr of approval. "These little fellas are new," David remarked, watching them play. "They're adorable." "They are," Martha agreed. "Born in the hayloft a couple of months ago. Their mother disappeared, so I'm raising them myself." They talked for a while, catching up on family news. David told her about his work at the garage, the challenges of keeping up with the latest automotive technology. Martha shared stories about the farm, the bumper crop of tomatoes she was expecting, the antics of her mischievous goats. But beneath the surface of their conversation, Martha sensed a subtle unease in David. He seemed a little distracted, his gaze often drifting towards the kittens. There was a loneliness in his eyes that she recognized, a reflection of her own solitude. Finally, after a long pause, David spoke, his voice hesitant. "Aunt Martha, I was wondering." He trailed off, looking down at the kittens, who were now batting at a stray piece of string. "I've been feeling a bit lonely lately," he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Living alone in that apartment, it gets quiet, and I was thinking, maybe one of these kittens could keep me company." The request hung in the air, heavy with unspoken emotion. Martha felt a pang of sadness, a mixture of empathy for her nephew and a deep reluctance to part with one of her beloved kittens. She looked at Rusty and Sunny, their innocent faces oblivious to the momentous decision that was being made. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the gentle creaking of the rocking chairs and the chirping of crickets in the gathering dusk. Martha knew she had a difficult choice to make. Her heart ached at the thought of separating the kittens, but she also couldn't ignore the genuine need in her nephew's eyes. The farm was quiet, but it was her whole world, and the animals filled it with their presence. David's world sounded far emptier. Martha's gaze softened as she looked at David, seeing not just her nephew, but the lonely little boy he once was, the boy who had found solace and adventure on her farm. She remembered the summers he'd spent chasing chickens, building forts in the woods, and falling asleep in the hayloft, exhausted from a day of outdoor play. She knew he had a good heart, a gentle spirit, and she trusted him to care for one of her kittens. But the thought of separating Rusty and Sunny still tugged at her heartstrings. They were so bonded, so reliant on each other for comfort and play. She imagined one of them waking up in a strange place, alone, missing the familiar scent of their sibling, the warmth of their shared nest. "David," she began slowly, her voice laced with a mixture of affection and concern. "I understand your loneliness, and I know you'd give a kitten a good home." She paused, stroking the soft fur of Sunny, who had climbed onto her lap. "But these two, they're like two peas in a pod. They've never been apart. It would be hard on them, especially the one who left." David nodded, his eyes downcast. "I know, Aunt Martha. I thought about that, but I just feel like I need a companion, someone to come home to." His voice cracked slightly, revealing the depth of his solitude. Martha's heart ached for him. She knew what it was like to feel alone, to long for the comfort of another presence. She spent the next hour wrestling with her decision, weighing her love for the kittens against her desire to help her nephew. She considered suggesting he take both kittens, but she knew that wouldn't be fair to him. He lived in a small apartment, and two kittens with their boundless energy might be too much for him to handle. Finally, as the last rays of sunlight faded from the sky, she made her decision. It was a painful one, a compromise between her heart and her head. "David," she said, her voice firm but gentle, "I'll let you take Rusty." She chose Rusty because he seemed slightly more independent, a bit more adventurous than his brother. He was the one who usually initiated their explorations of the farm, the one who was always the first to try new things. She hoped that his adventurous spirit would help him adapt to his new home. David's face lit up, his eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you, Aunt Martha. I promise I'll take good care of him. I'll bring him back to visit often." Martha nodded, forcing a smile. "I know you will, David. He's a good kitten. He loves to be petted, and he's a champion purrer." They spent the rest of the evening making arrangements. David promised to buy a carrier, food, and toys the next day. Martha showed him how to feed Rusty, how to clean his litter box, and how to play with him. As David prepared to leave, Martha held Rusty close, burying her face in his soft fur. She whispered a silent goodbye, her heart heavy with sadness. She knew she was doing the right thing, but it didn't make it any easier. She watched as David drove away, the small ginger kitten nestled in a carrier on the passenger seat. The farm felt suddenly quiet, emptier than it had in a long time. Sonny, sensing the absence of his brother, meowed plaintively, searching for him under the porch steps. Martha scooped him up, holding him close, trying to soothe both his sadness and her own. The stars seemed to twinkle a little less brightly that night. The silence of the farm, normally comforting, felt heavy and oppressive. David's apartment in Oakhaven was a stark contrast to the sprawling freedom of Martha's farm. It was a small, one-bedroom unit on the second floor of a modest apartment building, neat and tidy but lacking the warmth and character of the old farmhouse. The walls were painted a neutral beige, the furniture was functional but unremarkable, and the only decorations were a few framed prints of landscapes. Rusty, initially curious, explored his new surroundings with cautious steps. He sniffed at the corners of the rooms, investigated the unfamiliar furniture, and peered out the window at the street below, where cars whizzed by and people hurried along the sidewalk. The sounds were strange and unsettling: the rumble of traffic, the distant sirens, the murmur of voices from neighboring apartments. David had done his best to make the apartment welcoming for Rusty. He'd bought a comfortable cat bed, a scratching post, a variety of toys, and a supply of the same kitten food Martha had been feeding him. He'd placed the cat carrier near the window, hoping Rusty would feel secure in his familiar scent. But despite David's efforts, Rusty was clearly unhappy. He ate sparingly, picking at his food with little enthusiasm. He spent most of his time huddled in the cat carrier, his eyes wide and anxious. He rarely purred, and he flinched whenever David tried to pet him. David tried everything he could think of to cheer him up. He played with him using feather wands and laser pointers, but Rusty showed only fleeting interest. He bought him new toys, hoping to spark his curiosity, but Rusty ignored them. He even tried talking to him in soothing tones, telling him stories about the farm and promising him visits to see Martha and Sonny. But nothing seemed to work. Rusty's sadness deepened with each passing day. He lost weight, his fur became dull, and his eyes lost their sparkle. He spent hours staring out the window, as if longing for the open fields and the familiar sights and sounds of the farm. He'd yowl in the middle of the night. David felt a growing sense of guilt and helplessness. He'd taken Rusty from his home, his brother, and the only life he'd ever known, thinking he was doing a good thing, both for himself and for the kitten. But he'd been wrong. He'd unintentionally inflicted loneliness and suffering on a creature he'd come to care for deeply. He started to notice the small details that highlighted Rusty's misery. The way he'd flinch at sudden noises, the way he'd refuse to make eye contact, the way he'd constantly search for a hiding place, a refuge from the unfamiliar world around him. David tried to rationalize his decision, telling himself that Rusty would eventually adjust, that he'd get used to his new home and learn to love him. But deep down, he knew it wasn't true. He saw the longing in Rusty's eyes, the yearning for something he couldn't provide. He saw the reflection of his own loneliness in the kitten's sadness, and it broke his heart. He had made a mistake, a big one, and the small ginger kitten was paying the price. One particular evening, David came home from work to find Rusty huddled in a corner, trembling. He reached out to pet him, but Rusty hissed and swatted at his hand. It was the first time Rusty had shown any aggression, and it startled David. He realized that Rusty's unhappiness was more than just sadness. It was fear and despair. That night, David couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the events of the past few weeks in his mind. He thought about Rusty's playful antics on the farm, his bond with Sonny, and Martha's gentle affection for both kittens. He remembered the joy in Rusty's eyes when he was chasing butterflies in the meadow, the contentment in his purr when he was curled up in a sunbeam. He contrasted that with Rusty's current state, his listlessness, his fear, his refusal to eat. He realized that he'd taken a creature from a life of freedom and joy and confined him to a world of loneliness and anxiety. He had, in his own attempt to alleviate his loneliness, created a deeper loneliness in another being. The irony was painful, a sharp sting of self-reproach. David got out of bed and went into the living room. Rusty was curled up on the windowsill, staring out at the night sky. He looked small and vulnerable, a tiny speck of ginger against the vast darkness. David approached him slowly, speaking softly. "Rusty," he murmured, "I'm so sorry. I didn't understand. I thought I was doing the right thing, but I was wrong. So wrong." Rusty didn't respond, didn't even turn his head. He just continued to stare out the window, his body tense, his tail twitching nervously. David sat down on the floor near the window, his heart aching with guilt. He thought about calling Martha, confessing his mistake, and asking her to take Rusty back. But he hesitated, ashamed of his failure, afraid of her disappointment. He spent the next few hours researching online, reading articles about kitten behavior, separation anxiety, and the importance of a familiar environment for cats. He learned that cats are deeply territorial creatures, that they form strong attachments to their surroundings and to their social companions. He learned that separating bonded kittens can have devastating consequences for their emotional well-being. Everything he read confirmed what he already knew in his heart. Rusty needed to go back to the farm. He needed to be with his brother, with Martha, in the place where he felt safe and secure. David finally understood that his own loneliness couldn't be solved by taking away another creature's happiness. He'd been selfish, blinded by his own needs, and he'd caused harm to an innocent animal. He also started to realize that maybe his loneliness couldn't be fixed with a pet. The realization brought a sense of clarity, a resolve to do what was right, even if it meant facing his own discomfort and admitting his mistake. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he owed it to Rusty. He owed it to Martha, and he even owed it to Sunny. He decided to call Martha in the morning. He'd explain everything, apologize for his thoughtlessness, and ask her to take Rusty back. He knew she'd be disappointed, perhaps even angry, but he was prepared to face her reaction. He was prepared to do whatever it took to make things right. As the first rays of dawn crept through the window, David finally fell asleep, exhausted but resolute. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he was determined to see it through. He'd made a mistake, but he was going to fix it. He was going to bring Rusty home. He looked over at the small ginger cat, and a sense of grim determination washed over him. It was the least he could do. He had a long drive ahead of him. The next morning, David woke up with a heavy heart but a clear sense of purpose. He fed Rusty, who ate a few bites of his food, a slight improvement from the previous days. He then called Martha. The phone rang several times before Martha answered, her voice sleepy and slightly gruff. "Hello, Aunt Martha, it's David." There was a pause, a moment of silence before Martha spoke again, her voice now tinged with concern. "David? Is everything all right? Is Rusty okay?" David took a deep breath. "Aunt Martha, I made a mistake. A big mistake. Rusty isn't happy here. He misses the farm, he misses Sunny, he misses you. I need to bring him back." There was another silence, longer this time. David could almost hear Martha processing his words, her mind racing through the possibilities. Finally, she spoke, her voice surprisingly calm. "I knew it, David. I knew it wouldn't be easy for him. I saw it in his eyes when you left." David felt a wave of relief wash over him. He'd expected anger, disappointment, but Martha's understanding was a balm to his guilt-ridden soul. "I'm so sorry, Aunt Martha," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "I was selfish. I thought I could give him a good home, but I was wrong. He needs to be with you." "It's all right, David," Martha said gently. "You had good intentions, but sometimes good intentions aren't enough. "Bring him home, David. Bring him home." David packed Rusty's things, his carrier, his food, his toys, and loaded them into his truck. He then gently coaxed Rusty into the carrier, whispering soothing words to him. Rusty seemed to sense that something was changing, and he offered less resistance than usual. The drive back to the farm was filled with a mixture of emotions: for David, relief, anticipation, and a lingering sadness. He knew he was doing the right thing, but he couldn't help but feel a pang of loss. He'd grown attached to Rusty, despite the kitten's unhappiness. As he approached the farm, he saw Martha waiting for him on the porch, her figure silhouetted against the bright morning sun. Sonny was at her feet, his ginger tail twitching expectantly. David pulled up in front of the house and got out of the truck, carrying the carrier. Martha came down the steps to meet him, her eyes fixed on the carrier. "How is he?" she asked, her voice soft. "He's quiet," David replied, "but I think he knows he's coming home." Martha reached out and gently stroked the carrier. "He does," she said. "He does." David opened the carrier door, and Rusty cautiously stepped out, blinking in the sunlight. He looked around, his eyes widening as he recognized his surroundings. He saw Sonny, and his ears perked up. He took a few tentative steps towards his brother, then broke into a run, his tiny body a blur of ginger fur. Sonny met him halfway, and the two kittens tumbled together in a joyous reunion, their mews and purrs filling the air. They rubbed against each other, licked each other's faces, and chased each other around the yard, their playful energy restored. Martha watched them, a tear rolling down her cheek. She looked at David, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, David," she said. "Thank you for bringing him home." David smiled, his heart filled with a warmth that had nothing to do with his own needs and everything to do with the happiness of the two reunited kittens. He'd made a mistake, but he'd learned from it. He'd learned the importance of understanding, empathy, and the enduring power of home and family. The joy radiating from the two kittens was infectious, a pure, unadulterated happiness that washed away the lingering sadness he felt. He knew, without a doubt, that he'd done the right thing. The farm felt complete again, the balance restored. The weeks that followed Rusty's return were a time of healing and readjustment, not just for the kittens, but for Martha and David as well. Rusty quickly settled back into his old routine, his playful energy and voracious appetite returning with full force. He and Sonny were once again inseparable, exploring the farm together, napping in sunbeams, and causing mischief wherever they went. Martha watched them with a renewed sense of peace. She'd known all along that separating the kittens was a mistake, but she'd been swayed by David's loneliness. Now, seeing them together again, she felt a deep sense of contentment. The farm felt whole again, its rhythm restored. David visited the farm more frequently than he had before. He'd realized that his loneliness wasn't something that could be fixed by taking away another creature's happiness. He found solace in the quiet beauty of the farm, in the simple rhythm of rural life, and in the company of Martha and the two kittens. He helped Martha with chores, mended fences, and weeded the garden. He spent hours watching Rusty and Sonny play, their boundless energy and joyful antics a constant source of amusement. He'd sit with Martha on the porch in the evenings, sharing stories and sipping lemonade, the crickets chirping a soothing chorus in the background. David's visits became a cherished part of Martha's routine. She appreciated his help around the farm, but more than that, she valued his companionship. She saw a change in him, a maturity and understanding that hadn't been there before. He seemed more at peace with himself, less burdened by the loneliness that had driven him to take Rusty in the first place. He started to explore new hobbies, things he could do in his own town. He joined a hiking club, finding a sense of community and a connection to nature that he'd been missing. He started taking evening classes in woodworking, discovering a hidden talent and a passion for creating things with his hands. One day, David brought Martha a small wooden birdhouse he'd made, a gift for the farm. It was beautifully crafted, with intricate details and a smooth, polished finish. Martha hung it from a branch of the old oak tree in the front yard, and it soon became a favorite nesting spot for a pair of bluebirds. "It's beautiful, David," Martha said, admiring his handiwork. "You have a real gift." David smiled, his eyes shining with pride. "Thanks, Aunt Martha. I'm enjoying it. It's helping." Martha understood what he meant. He was finding his own way, his own path to happiness. A path that didn't involve taking shortcuts or relying on others for his emotional well-being. He was learning to be content with himself, to find joy in the simple things, and to build meaningful connections with the world around him. The two ginger kittens, now grown into sleek, handsome cats, continued to be the heart of the farm. They were Martha's constant companions, her furry shadows, and a living reminder of the enduring power of love and family. And David, the nephew who had once tried to separate them, had become a cherished part of their extended family, a welcome visitor who brought laughter, companionship, and the occasional beautifully crafted wooden gift. The farm, once marked by a brief period of sadness, was now a haven of peace and contentment, a testament to the enduring bonds that tie us together, both human and animal. The sun set each evening, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, a perfect backdrop to the tranquil scene of a family, reunited and whole.
Woman finds abandoned stray cat in front of abandoned house. Her actions move people. Why would a stray cat be so obsessed with an abandoned house? When a retired teacher follows him inside, she uncovers a 5-year-old secret hidden in a child's diary. But the truth about the missing family is far more shocking than anyone suspects. Subscribe, like, and listen now to find out what really happened in the Blackwood house. Dust motes danced in the single beam of afternoon light, slicing through the grimy window pane of the abandoned master bedroom. The air hung thick with the smell of decay, old plaster, and something else. A faint, lingering scent of fear. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. A frantic bird trapped in a cage. She shouldn't be here, trespassing in the derelict Blackwood place the house whispered about in hushed tones throughout the small Pennsylvania town for the last 5 years. But the cat Rusty had insisted. He'd led her through the creaking debris-strewn rooms with an unnerving sense of purpose, finally stopping here before a massive dark oak wardrobe that dominated one wall. Now he sat before it, tail twitching, letting out low, insistent meows, occasionally reaching up to scratch at the heavy carved door. "What is it? Rusty?" Clara whispered, her voice hoarse. "There's nothing here." But Rusty persisted, his cries growing more urgent. Hesitantly, Clara reached out and pulled on the heavy brass handle. The wardrobe door swung open with a groan, revealing darkness and the musty smell of old clothes, long gone. "Nothing." "See," she started, but Rusty darted inside, disappearing into the blackness at the back. He immediately started scratching again, his meows muffled now. Taking a deep breath, Clara fumbled for the flashlight on her phone, its weak beam cutting through the gloom. She stepped into the wardrobe, pushing aside imaginary cobwebs. The back panel wasn't solid. Rusty was scratching at a seam, a faint outline barely visible beneath layers of dust and grime. A hidden compartment. Her pulse quickened. With trembling fingers, she pushed against the panel. It gave way slightly, revealing a small dark space behind it. The smell that hit her was different. Stale air, yes, but also the faint, cloying scent of old perfume and something else. Fear again palpable. Rusty squeezed through the opening, shining the light inside. Clara saw it wasn't empty. A child-sized mattress lay on the floor, stained and thin. A few scattered wooden blocks, a well-loved stuffed rabbit missing an eye, and a small leather-bound book lay near the back. Rusty immediately went to the book, rubbing his head against it, purring loudly now. a sound that seemed horribly out of place in the oppressive silence. Clara reached down her hand, shaking, and picked up the diary. Dust puffed up as she opened the cover. The first page read, Evelyn Blackwood Property. She flipped through pages filled with elegant looping script that grew increasingly frantic towards the end. Then she saw the names Leo, her son, and Rusty, the boy's beloved orange cat. Clara's blood ran cold. Rusty wasn't just a stray she'd found weeks ago. He was this Rusty. Evelyn's last entry, dated 5 years prior, was scrawled almost illegible. Richard's coming. Locked. Leo and Rusty in the safe place. Pray someone finds them. Pray he doesn't. Clara stared at the cat, who now looked up at her with those knowing amber eyes. He hadn't just led her here, he'd brought her to his hiding place, the hiding place where his young owner Leo had last been seen. But the space was empty, save for the diary and toys. Where was the boy? What had happened after Evelyn wrote those desperate words? The silence of the house pressed in heavy with unanswered questions and the chilling weight of 5 years gone by. Clara Harrison had settled into the quiet rhythm of retirement in Oak Haven, a small town nestled in the rolling hills of eastern Pennsylvania. A former elementary school teacher, she filled her days with gardening, reading, volunteering at the library, and long walks through the familiar streets. Her life was orderly, predictable, perhaps a little lonely. Since her husband passed away 3 years prior, her small, tidy bungalow sat on a street that eventually petered out near the edge of town, close to the infamous Blackwood place. The Blackwood house was a local legend, a grand but decaying Victorian mansion set back from the road, slowly being swallowed by overgrown ivy and speculation. 5 years ago, the young family living there had simply vanished. Richard Blackwood, a man with a reportedly volatile temper and rumored financial troubles. His wife Evelyn described as beautiful but withdrawn. And their young son Leo, about 5 years old at the time. One day they were there, the next gone. The police investigation hit dead ends. Theories ranged from foul play to a family skipping town to escaped debts. But nothing was ever confirmed. The house stood empty, a monument to unanswered questions, its windows boarded up like blind eyes. Clara usually walked past it quickly, a shiver tracing its way down her spine despite her rational nature. Until that dreary afternoon about a month ago, as she passed the rusting wrought iron fence, a faint, pitiful cry reached her ears. It came from the tangled mess of weeds and thorny bushes near the dilapidated front porch. Pushing aside prickly branches, she found him a young orange cat, impossibly thin, shivering, trapped by a thorny vine, his fur matted and dull. His amber eyes, wide with fear, met hers, moved by pity. Clara carefully freed the cat, bundling his frail body into her cardigan. He was too weak to struggle. Back in the warmth of her bungalow, she cleaned him, fed him diluted warm milk with an eyedropper, and made him a soft bed in a box. She named him Rusty for his coloring. Slowly, painstakingly, Rusty regained his strength. He proved to be surprisingly affectionate, purring readily, rubbing against her legs, filling a quiet space in her home she hadn't realized was so empty. But there was something odd about him. He seemed haunted, often staring intently towards the direction of the Blackwood place. And whenever Clara opened her front door, Rusty would make a dash for it, not running randomly, but heading straight back towards the abandoned house, meowing plaintively. If she stopped him, it happened several times. He seemed desperate to return. One cool afternoon curiosity and a growing concern for the cat's strange fixation overcame Clara's apprehension. Rusty darted out the door again, making a beeline for the Blackwood property. This time, Clara followed. She watched as he bypassed the bushes where she'd found him and went directly to the imposing, weather-beaten front door. He sat before it, scratching lightly at the wood, letting out those insistent, almost pleading meows. A feeling of unease washed over Clara. Why was he so drawn to this specific spot? It wasn't just instinct. It felt like purpose. She looked around. The street was deserted. The house loomed silently. Hesitantly, she reached out and pushed lightly on the massive door. To her surprise, it wasn't locked. It swung inward with a long, protesting groan, revealing a dark, dust-filled foyer. The air inside was stale heavy. Rusty didn't hesitate, darting immediately into the gloom. This was the inciting incident. Clara stood at the threshold, heart pounding. Every instinct told her to turn back to call someone, anyone. But worry for Rusty, coupled with an undeniable prickling curiosity about the cat's strange behavior and the house's secrets, pushed her forward. "Rusty?" she called softly, her voice swallowed by the silence. Taking a deep breath, she stepped over the threshold, pulling the door partially closed behind her. Entering the forgotten world of the Blackwood place, her initial goal simply to retrieve the cat, unaware she was stepping into the heart of a 5-year-old mystery. The discovery in the hidden closet left Clara shaken to her core. She carefully carried the diary and the stuffed rabbit back to her own home, Rusty trotting anxiously beside her, occasionally looking back towards the looming Blackwood place, back in the familiar comfort of her living room. With Rusty finally settled on her lap, though still seeming agitated, Clara knew she couldn't keep this to herself. She called the Oak Haven Police Department. Detective Frank Harding, a weary but sharp investigator who remembered the original Blackwood disappearance case, well arrived, looking skeptical, but listened patiently as Clara recounted finding Rusty, his strange behavior, following him into the house, and the discovery of the hidden closet and the diary. He examined the diary and the rabbit with professional detachment, but his eyes narrowed as Clara pointed out the names Leo and Rusty, and the final terrifying entry. 5 years, Harding murmured, rubbing his chin. "We searched this house top to bottom back then, never found any hidden compartments. Clever. He bagged the items as evidence. This changes things, Mrs. Harrison, significantly." The investigation was officially reopened. Harding and his team conducted a thorough forensic search of the Blackwood house, paying special attention to the hidden closet and the master bedroom. They found faint traces, old fingerprints, but nothing conclusive about what happened after Evelyn wrote that last entry. There was no sign of a struggle within the closet itself, no blood evidence pointing to violence against the child or the cat within that space. The house yielded few new clues about the fate of Evelyn or Richard Blackwood. Richard's car had been found abandoned at a bus station in a nearby city a week after the family was reported missing, but he himself had never surfaced. The trail was cold, frustratingly, so Clara found herself drawn into the investigation partly because she had found the crucial evidence and partly because of Rusty. The cat was the only living link to that hidden room to Leo. She felt an immense responsibility towards him and through him towards the lost boy. She spent hours reading Evelyn's diary, Harding had allowed her supervised access, hoping she might spot something contextual he missed. The early entries painted a picture of a loving mother excited about her son Leo, doting on his bond with his little orange cat. But gradually, a darker thread emerged. Mentions of Richard's temper, his controlling behavior. Evelyn's growing fear veiled references to arguments and isolation. Rusty, meanwhile, seemed to understand that something had shifted. He rarely tried to run back to the Blackwood house now, instead staying close to Clara, often sitting quietly while she read the diary as if listening. He still seemed anxious sometimes, pacing or letting out low meows, especially when Clara reached the later, more fearful entries in the diary. Complications arose. News of the reopened investigation sparked by the retired teacher and the stray cat leaked to the local newspaper. Clara found herself the subject of unwanted attention. Reporters calling, neighbors whispering, some admiring her actions, others thinking she was a meddling old woman stirring up painful history. Her quiet life was disrupted. Her niece Sarah called from Philadelphia worried, "Aunt Clara, are you sure you should be involved? That house, those people, it sounds dangerous." Clara assured Sarah she was being careful, but privately she sometimes felt overwhelmed. The mystery deepened. If Leo wasn't in the closet, where did he go? Did Evelyn manage to get him out somehow after writing the note? Did Richard find them? And what happened to Evelyn and Richard? The questions circled endlessly. One rainy afternoon, Clara was rereading a section of the diary describing Leo's favorite hiding places in the overgrown garden. Rusty, who had been dozing, suddenly became alert, went to the back door, and started scratching insistently. On impulse, Clara put on her raincoat and boots, let Rusty out, and followed him. He led her not towards the Blackwood house itself, but along the back fence line towards a thick, overgrown patch of rhododendrons near an old crumbling stone wall that marked the property boundary. He squeezed into the bushes and started digging frantically at the base of the wall, meowing, heart pounding. Clara pushed aside the wet branches. Where Rusty was digging, almost hidden by roots and moss, was a small tarnished silver locket shaped like a heart. It was caked with mud, but she could just make out a faint engraving. Cleaning it later, she saw the initials ELB, Evelyn's, or Evelyn and Leo. Had it been dropped during an escape, Rusty had led her right to it. It was another small piece, another question, deepening the mystery and strengthening Clara's resolve to find answers, no matter how complicated or unsettling they might be. The discovery of the locket, seemingly guided by Rusty, gave Detective Harding a tangible new lead. However, small forensics found nothing useful on the locket itself. It had been exposed to the elements for too long. But its location, near the back boundary of the property away from the house itself, suggested a possible escape route, rather than something dropped within the confines of the main house or garden. It supported a theory that perhaps Evelyn and Leo had managed to get out at least temporarily. Harding decided to re-examine Richard Blackwood's background and known associates more closely. The initial investigation had focused heavily on him as the likely perpetrator if foul play was involved, especially given the rumors of his temper and the abandoned car. But what if he wasn't the only factor? What if Evelyn had help? Weeks turned into a month. The media attention died down, but the questions lingered. Clara continued her quiet life, punctuated by updates, or lack thereof, from Harding, and the constant comforting, yet somehow unsettling presence of Rusty. She often found herself talking to the cat, telling him about her day, asking him silent questions about Leo, about Evelyn. He would watch her with those intelligent amber eyes, occasionally offering a soft meow or a head nuzzle. A silent confidant. The turning point came unexpectedly from the diary itself. Harding had returned it to Clara, having gleaned all he could forensically. One evening, unable to sleep, Clara was idly flipping through the pages again, not reading intently, just touching the paper Evelyn had touched. Rusty was curled on her lap, purring softly. As she turned a page near the middle, an entry from happier times describing a family trip to a lake cottage owned by Evelyn's aunt. Rusty suddenly lifted his head, sniffed pointedly at a specific paragraph, and let out a soft chirp, a sound Clara hadn't heard him make before. Curious, Clara looked closely at the paragraph he'd indicated. It seemed innocuous. Evelyn describing Leo playing near an old boathouse, laughing as Rusty chased dragonflies. But then Clara noticed something odd. Evelyn had underlined 3 words, seemingly at random, within the description: safe, key, and under. It didn't make sense in the context of the sentence. Had she missed this before? It wasn't marked or annotated in any other way. Safe key. Under Clara's mind raced. Could it be a code, a message hidden in plain sight? She remembered Evelyn's growing fear documented later in the diary. Was it possible Evelyn had anticipated needing to leave a clue long before the final crisis? She thought about the hidden closet, the safe place. What about a key? And underdriven by a sudden surge of adrenaline, she called Detective Harding. Despite the late hour, "I think I found something," she explained breathlessly, reading him the passage and the underlined words. Harding was intrigued. "It's thin, Clara, but it's more than we've had." He promised to look into the lake cottage mentioned in the diary entry. It was owned by Evelyn's aunt, who had passed away years ago. Even before the Blackwoods disappeared, the cottage itself had reportedly been sold shortly after the aunt's death. Harding assigned an officer to track down the current owners and see if they knew anything about the property's history, specifically any hidden keys or unusual features under the boathouse. This discovery, prompted by Rusty's inexplicable behavior, fundamentally shifted Clara's role. She was no longer just the person who found the diary. She felt like an active participant in deciphering Evelyn's potential message. The focus shifted from simply understanding the past tragedy to actively searching for a potential survivor or a hidden truth. Had Evelyn managed to hide something crucial, evidence perhaps, or instructions related to a key under the boathouse at that remote lake cottage? The possibility, however faint, ignited a new sense of urgency and hope. Clara felt she owed it to Evelyn, to Leo, and to the strangely intuitive cat purring on her lap to follow this thread wherever it might lead. The passive waiting was over. The active search had begun. The lead from the diary, however tenuous, injected new energy into the investigation. Detective Harding managed to track down the current owners of the lake cottage, a retired couple from Pittsburgh who had bought it as a vacation home about 6 years ago, shortly after Evelyn's aunt passed away and just before the Blackwoods disappeared. They knew little about the previous occupants, but agreed to let Harding and a local officer search the property, particularly the old boathouse mentioned in the diary. Harding drove up to the lake a few hours north. Clara waited anxiously back in Oak Haven, Rusty, an unusually quiet presence beside her. The initial search of the dusty, dilapidated boathouse yielded nothing. It was filled with old fishing gear, decaying life jackets, and cobwebs. There was no obvious key, no hidden compartment. Harding was about to dismiss the clue as a dead end, a product of wishful thinking, when he remembered the third word. He instructed the local officer to check under the boathouse structure itself, which sat partially over the water on old wooden pilings. Crouching down, wading into the shallow, murky water beneath the dock, the officer ran his hands along the damp, moss-covered beams. His fingers closed around something small and metallic, wedged tightly into a crevice between two pilings just above the waterline. A small, old-fashioned brass key, heavily tarnished, but intact. Harding felt a jolt of excitement. A key hidden under the boathouse, just as the underlined word suggested. But what did it open? It didn't match any locks at the cottage. He carefully bagged the key and headed back to Oak Haven. He showed the key to Clara. It looked like a key to a piece of furniture or perhaps a lockbox. "Does this look familiar from anything you saw in the Blackwood house?" he asked. Clara shook her head. No, but Evelyn mentioned her husband Richard had an old roll-top desk in his study. She rarely went in there. Armed with a warrant, Harding returned to the Blackwood place. The study was as dusty and neglected as the rest of the house. The roll-top desk stood against one wall, its lock mechanism intricate. Harding tried the key. It fit perfectly. With a soft click, the lock turned. He carefully rolled back the top. Inside were organized papers, old bills, business correspondence, nothing immediately incriminating. But in a small locked drawer within the desk, which the key also opened, they found what Richard Blackwood had desperately tried to hide, not evidence of violence against Evelyn, but evidence of extensive embezzlement from his former employer, detailed ledgers, offshore account numbers, and correspondence, indicating he was planning to fake his family's disappearance and flee the country before his crimes were discovered. There was also a one-way plane ticket booked in his name alone, dated the day after the family vanished. This discovery painted a different picture. Richard wasn't necessarily a murderer, but a cornered embezzler planning to abandon his family and disappear. Did Evelyn find out? Did that precipitate the final crisis? The investigation now focused on Richard as a fugitive wanted for embezzlement, but it still didn't answer what happened to Evelyn and Leo. If Richard fled alone, where were they? Did Evelyn confront him and meet with foul play? Or did she execute her own escape plan? Clara felt a growing sense of dread. If Richard had fled, was it possible he had harmed Evelyn before leaving? The diary spoke of his temper. The fear felt heavier now. She found herself clinging to the hope sparked by the hidden key, the hope that Evelyn had outsmarted him somehow. As Harding dug deeper into Richard's financials and potential escape routes, Clara focused on the diary again, looking for any other subtle clues. Rusty stayed close, often placing a paw on the book as she read. One evening, he nudged a specific page detailing Evelyn's volunteer work at a women's shelter in a nearby city before she married Richard. It mentioned her close friendship with the shelter's director, a woman named Martha Jennings. Could Evelyn have reached out to her old friend, someone outside Richard's sphere of control? It was a long shot. After 5 years, Clara found the shelter online. Martha Jennings was still listed as the director. With Harding's cautious approval, Clara decided to make the call. Her hands trembled as she dialed, explaining who she was mentioning. Evelyn Blackwood? There was a long pause on the other end. Then Martha Jennings' voice, guarded but kind, said, "Evelyn, yes, I remember her well." "What is this about?" Clara explained everything, finding Rusty, the diary, the hidden closet, the embezzlement, the unanswered questions about Evelyn and Leo. There was another silence, longer this time. Mrs. Harrison. Martha finally said, her voice thick with emotion, "Perhaps you should come and see me. There's something you need to know. Something I've kept secret for 5 years." Clara felt a dizzying mix of hope and fear. Was this it? Was she finally about to learn the truth? The final pieces were aligning, pointing towards this meeting, towards the resolution of a 5-year mystery. The climax was at hand. Clara drove to the city the next day, Rusty safely secured in a carrier beside her. She couldn't bear to leave him behind. Now, the women's shelter was a modest brick building in a quiet neighborhood. Martha Jennings, a woman with kind eyes and an air of quiet strength that reminded Clara of Evelyn's diary entries, greeted her warmly, but with an underlying gravity. They sat in Martha's small, cluttered office. Clara briefly recounted the key events again, her voice trembling slightly. Martha listened patiently, her expression a mixture of sadness and resolve. Evelyn was terrified. Martha began softly confirming the diary's accounts. Richard was controlling, abusive, and she discovered his plan to embezzle money and flee, leaving her and Leo with nothing but his debts and disgrace. She knew she had to get Leo out. Martha explained that Evelyn, using the skills and contacts she'd gained volunteering at the shelter, had meticulously planned an escape. The hidden closet was a temporary measure for emergencies. The hidden key and the embezzlement evidence in the desk, Evelyn had discovered them and planned to use them as leverage or expose Richard if necessary. The night she wrote that last diary entry, Martha continued, her voice dropping, Richard came home, drunk, enraged about something at work. Evelyn feared the worst. She put Leo and Rusty in the closet, wrote that note, then confronted Richard, trying to buy time, hoping to retrieve Leo later and enact her real escape plan. Clara held her breath. What happened? There was a terrible argument. Richard hit her, but Evelyn fought back in the struggle. Richard fell. He hit his head on the fireplace hearth. Martha paused, taking a shaky breath. He died. Clara, it was an accident, a terrible, tragic accident born of fear and self-defense. Clara gasped, stunned. Richard wasn't a fugitive. He was dead. Evelyn panicked. Martha said she knew no one would believe it was self-defense given Richard's standing and her plans to leave. She felt trapped. She retrieved a terrified Leo from the closet, but in the chaos, Rusty bolted out of the house and disappeared into the night. Heartbroken, but knowing she had to save her son, Evelyn used her escape plan. She contacted me. We helped her get Leo to her cousin out west, establishing a new identity for them both. Evelyn intended to follow, but Martha's voice broke. She couldn't live with what happened. The guilt, the fear. She took her own life a few months later, making it look like an accident. The truth was devastating, far more complex and tragic than Clara had imagined. Evelyn hadn't been murdered. She'd acted in self-defense and succumbed to despair. Richard wasn't a fugitive. His body was likely still hidden somewhere, perhaps, even within the vast grounds of the Blackwood place. A loose end Harding would later investigate, and Leo was alive but orphaned. The revelations brought a somber closure. Martha provided Detective Harding with proof. Letters from Evelyn details of the escape network, corroborating the story, while the legal complexities surrounding Richard's death and Evelyn's actions were significant. The immediate focus became Leo. Martha had maintained discreet contact with Leo's cousin Leo, now 10 years old, knew his mother had died, but believed his father had simply abandoned them. He had faint, fragmented memories of his early childhood, including a beloved orange cat he thought was lost forever. Clara, with Martha's help, arranged to meet Leo and his cousin. The meeting took place cautiously. At first, Leo was a quiet, serious boy, understandably wary. Clara gently told him about finding Rusty, about his mother's bravery, carefully omitting the most traumatic details of Richard's death for the authorities to handle appropriately later. Then she brought out the carrier. When Rusty emerged, Leo stared, his eyes widening in disbelief. The cat, hesitant for only a moment, seemed to recognize the boy instantly. Rusty walked forward, rubbed against Leo's legs, and let out a loud purr. Leo sank to his knees, tears streaming down his face, burying his face in the soft orange fur. "Rusty," he whispered over and over, "you came back." It was a reunion, 5 years in the making, a tangible link to the mother he had lost and the life he barely remembered. In the following months, life settled into a new pattern. The Blackwood house, its secrets finally aired, was eventually sold. The proceeds placed in trust for Leo. Leo remained with his cousin, who provided a loving, stable home, but he formed a strong bond with Clara, visiting her often, and Rusty, the catalyst for it all, stayed with Clara, though he clearly remembered and adored Leo, happily dividing his time between his rescuer and his first boy during visits. Clara's quiet retirement was transformed. Her brave actions, driven by compassion for a stray cat, had not only solved a mystery, but had brought truth and a measure of peace to shattered lives. The story resonated through Oak Haven, reminding people that kindness matters, that connections endure, and that sometimes the most unassuming creatures hold the keys to the most profound secrets. Clara, once lonely, now found her life filled with purpose, love, and the constant comforting presence of the remarkable orange cat who remembered